There's something about lightning that never ceases to amaze me. All its wonderful shapes, effects, and power, I always wanted to recreate it in 3D. Well, with my Master 3D Environments in Blender course, I got a perfect opportunity to do just that. And since this topic was requested quite a bit by many of our students, I decided to do something even better. Publish this workflow for free on our YouTube channel. When thinking of new workflows to discover in Blender, I usually try to pick the one that is the most straightforward to achieve my concrete goal. Sure, I could use geometry nodes or other complicated solutions, but I knew I wouldn't be needing a great variety of shapes, actually just one for this shot. And for that purpose, I figured a perfect technique would be to employ grease pencil, an ingenious tool which, up until this point, I haven't actually explored in the Master 3D Environments course. Before that, however, we need two crucial pieces of reference. First, an image of lightning, so I just used this one for its nice forking. Next up, I searched YouTube for videos of lightning strikes, regular and in slow motion too. Fortunately, there is this amazing channel called Slow-Mo Guys, who basically kept relatively ordinary stuff, only in real slow motion. I said relatively ordinary. And this is perfect for studying super fast occurrences like lightning. So we can see beautifully here how it expands and forks in all these little ways. Then there's this big wham when it hits the surface, increasing its emission considerably at that point. And then, this was actually quite a bit of surprise for me, it just starts to fade away. Very interesting. So with that knowledge, let's jump into Blender. First, let me import this lightning image using the Import Images as Planes add-on, which you can activate in the Preferences add-on section. So load up the image, and then switch to Top View and the Color mode to Texture. In the Add menu then, let's create this blank grease pencil object and switch to Drawing mode. And if this is the first time you're working with grease pencil, it's simply a tool to paint in 3D space, which then leaves your strokes floating in the scene like this. You can then move it in object mode, edit it all you want, and do all sorts of advanced stuff with this stroke. I love this tool. So what we'll do with this, first use this draw tool and in the brush settings adjust our radius to about 10. And then start tracing the lightning. Of course, this is much better with some sort of tablet or Cintiq, but mouse will do as well. Let's now only trace the base of the lightning and have a look at what we've made. So just like with any object in Blender, in the outliner we have the grease pencil object container here that, if we expand this, has these object data in it. And all our strokes are added under this object data G-pencil on a layer that is created in this menu here. You can in fact add more layers and paint on them, then hide them, lock them, mask them, etc. Let's not, however, make this more complicated than it needs to be. This would be more useful for someone making, let's say, an animated shot in Blender, which grease pencil is an amazing tool for, by the way. And just to make the lightning a bit more lightning-y, let's make this color of the material to be white. One thing you do need to realize, however, is that the frame on which you make your grease pencil stroke does matter. Let's go to Dope Sheet here and switch to Grease Pencil submenu. And here you can see we have a keyframe on frame 1, and if we move this keyframe in time, our stroke will only appear from that frame on. Not really something we will use right now, just something to be aware of. We will create all our strokes of the lightning at frame 1. We can name our grease pencil lightning_main. And now let's draw a few more lightning objects. I want to have them on a separate object, so let's create a new blank. Name it lightning medium 01, and again, make sure you're on frame 1. Decrease the radius of the stroke and get painting. This way I have traced my lightning from the image, making several medium and several small variations. Those I made with radius of 3. Every one of these lightnings I put on a separate object, and every time I finished, I added this white material to it. Blender unfortunately has this nasty habit of creating a new material every time you create a new grease pencil object. And by the way, you can always adjust the thickness of those strokes by hitting Tab to go into edit mode and then selecting various pieces of this stroke and hitting Alt S. When you use proportional editing, this is perfect for making the end of the forks a little bit smaller, making them look more natural. For each of these objects then, I shifted the origin to its starting point, using Shift and right mouse button to position the origin, and then using the origin to 3D cursor option. By the way, it's real handy to right click on it and add it to your favorites menu, and then you just hit Q and you have the command always close at hand. I then went around, and to save time, instead of tracing more unique small lightnings, I just duplicated around the ones I already had. This way, I've completed my lightning. And now the ingenious thing about Grease Pencil. If you go to this modifiers menu and add this build, how cool is that? The tool actually remembers how you drew your stroke and it animates it for you. Time the frames number to make it fast enough. I made it like 3 frames, and then do the same for all the other lightning objects, except you also need to adjust the start delay here. I usually jump right to the frame before the bigger lightning hits the spot and make that frame the start delay. Also, don't forget to make the frames number smaller to make it build faster. And then I proceeded to unhide the rest of the lightning objects and repeat the same process, timing the build of the little forks. And if you want to quickly copy this modifier to all the other lightning objects, just unhide them, shift select them, select the main one as the last one, and then copy to select it in this menu. And then just proceed with the timing of the little forks to achieve something like this. To add to our effect that we saw in the slow-mo guys video, you can add another modifier. This time it's thickness. And this one is super useful when you realize that the thickness of your brush stroke wasn't quite what you wanted it. So you can always adjust it with this one and even keyframe it. So when the lightning hits the ground, you can make it a little bit thicker. And at the end, keyframe it thinner again. This will help us achieve that flash effect. Do it for some of the larger forks, and it will help us later when we add it into a shot. Now you can add a final modifier called opacity and simulate it fading out for a few frames to get that disappearing effect. And now you will have to copy it around to the rest of the smaller lightning objects. Unfortunately, I just wasn't able to find out how to copy around the same modifier with keyframes included. So you have to go and keyframe the value on each of the modifiers, then copy the keyframes from the original lightning on the timeline and paste them to each of the opacity channels on the other ones. So Ctrl C, keyframe this value, and then Ctrl V in the timeline. And repeat. So I'll speed this up. And then when you're done with that and realize the opacity is improperly timed and you need to push it around, it's as easy as selecting all the lightning pieces, typing opacity here in the search bar, and only the keyframes with opacity will be editable. With this filtering, you'll be able to push them and scale them without editing the other keyframes on your lightning objects. So that's our lightning animation. At this point, one important step, make sure to parent all your smaller lightning objects into the main one, and also to put all of them onto a single collection. This way it will be easier to append and move around later when we add it into a scene. You can also shift click this select toggle to make the little ones non-selectable, and then reactivate the selectability just for the main lightning. And with that, we've finished the actual lightning, and now for the other 2 stages of the process. Putting it to a shot, and then compositing it in. Let's use these stormy waves from the course as an example on how to add lightning effect to your scenes. Into this one, onto a separate collection, I appended my lightning object. You need to figure out where to place your lightning. I decided to put it here. And also, I wanted to push its start in time. I decided it's going to be best at frame 115. Of course, our lightning starts at frame 0 because we set it up. But remember that grease pencil keyframe that we explored in Dope Sheet? Well, that one can drive the offset when the stroke appears. So if we just shift this keyframe for all our lightning pieces, it will start at the frame where we indicate. You will of course have to jump into timeline 2 to shift the keyframes for the modifiers. Exactly what we need. You can also restrict the timeline to only the duration of the lightning. And then I just added a point light in the area where it originates. I animated its power to go from 0 to something very, very strong. This will depend on your scene, so definitely test it out with a viewport render active, but in my case it was like 50 megawatts. And then it goes again to 0 power, ending when the lightning disappears. And really make sure to time the fading away of the light with the lightning. This light, of course, is there to illuminate the landscape, in our case the ocean. So I put it on a new collection and also a new render layer called Lighting. And on this new render layer, I hid everything except for the ocean and the light collections. By the way, I talk about render layers extensively in my course, or you can even watch this free introduction video on our channel. It should pop up right now, or you can find it below in the video description. On a separate render layer, I then put the lightning, and by itself it probably won't be visible for you, so I just added a simple sun lamp at a fair amount of strength, like 6, to illuminate my lightning object. Alternatively, to have the strokes illuminated, you don't have to use the sun lamp. Instead, just select all your grease pencil objects and uncheck this Use Light parameter in the Object Data menu here. If you want to do it for all of them at once, just hold down Alt while clicking on the checker, and the same command is then repeated on all of them. This is, by the way, a super handy shortcut for multi-editing, one that saved me an enormous amount of time. If you want, you can even go to this menu here and add one of these effects from the menu, in our case the glow. Set its size to be smaller, make it white, and there, you've overlaid a little glow over your lightning. Me, however, I chose to leave this for later, for the compositing stage. I then proceeded to render out this lighting render layer. I probably could have thought of a more different name from the lightning, which was the next layer that I rendered, and I rendered it out separately to be able to play around with it in the compositing. I restricted the rendering only for the duration of the effect, and in the end I ended up with 2 new image sequences, the few frames with the illuminated waves and the frames with the lightning. Now be warned, this compositing part will be a little bit more advanced, definitely for people who already know a bit about this topic in Blender. The footage I've rendered, I added into my finished composition of the stormy waves. And if you subscribe to our resources at cgboost.com, you can even download my animated sequences to follow along with this compositing part of the tutorial. Now, for you to have a basic idea, let me actually just very quickly put my sequences together to demonstrate the workflow. I like to start my compositing process from the back. So here I first plugged in an image sequence of my sky to the composite and view node. View node so that I can see it in the backdrop. Over it I put the lightning footage, but since I rendered it only from frame 115, I need to make the start frame 115. To mix these 2 layers, you can either use a mix node with this transparency toggle active, or use alpha over with convert pre-multiply to properly factor in the alpha. I used the alpha over. Above it, I added a background waves footage, and finally the foreground waves. I actually played with the positioning of the elements a little bit using this transform node. So I made the sky larger at 1.2 scale and pushed it down 70 pixels, as you can see here. I also pushed the background waves up a bit. That way it all worked together a little bit better. Finally, over everything, I added my waves lit by the lightning, again using alpha over with the pre-multiply option active and timing it to start at 115 frame. To make this basic network a little bit more organized, I used Ctrl J to name my different parts of the network, giving it color and scaling it up like this. To kinda vary the animation of the lightning, I played a little bit with this vector value, keyframing it in time, choosing values of 1, 2, 3 to kinda make it flicker like a real lightning would. Just make it the most intense when it hits the surface and then make it go randomly away until 0. And a neat trick you can do here, you can have this vector of the lightning layer drive the same vector in these lit up waves here, making this layer flicker as well. Just right click on this vector, copy the driver and paste it here as a driver. The value will turn purple and it will source the data from here. It's good to be friends with drivers in Blender. It can help you do so much stuff, especially in animation. And as you can see, it is very easy. The rest was about blending the elements a little bit better together. First off, the sky is actually not reacting to the lightning, since it is just a simple image. So I made a little ellipse mask and used it together with a mix node, blending in white color like this. If you have Node Wrangler active, you can just Ctrl-Shift-Click various nodes to only preview those. So to save performance, I preview only this alpha over, so that I can see only these 3 layers with the sky, the ellipse and the lightning. Then I place the ellipse right around where the lightning is. By the way, very important at this point, always make sure your output settings here have the same resolution as your footage. In my case it was this. And also have 100% here. Otherwise your ellipse masks will go crazy, being formatted in different resolutions. And if you've already created your ellipse mask and then changed the resolution, just delete it and create it again. Plug it into vector, position it on X and scale it on Y like this. Next, blur the ellipse with fast Gaussian and a value of about 300 so that the mix turns into this glow. Set the mix node to color dodge and here you go. We have this wonderful glow brightening the sky in this area. And this is a great example of why you would use compositing to enhance your shots even after you've rendered everything. You can drive the opacity of this effect by using an exposure node and keyframing between values of 0 and -2. 0 for the brightest part and -2 for when it should disappear. One last thing I can show you here, let's blur the lightning. However, if I just use blur, it will, well, just blur the whole layer. But I actually want to retain the sharp detail of the lightning, while also adding a little bit of gradual glow to it. For that, let's add blur node, with fast Gaussian set to about 15 pixels on X and Y, and a mix node where you can set the node to screen. Now plug the blurred lightning into the first socket and then use the same footage and plug it into the second socket. You get this. I then added 2 more screen mix nodes, repeating the same process, plugging gradually more and more blurred lightning over the original blend. Now the way you set this up matters, so I found out that the best blend I get when I use screen mode here for these 2 without transparency, because then the blurring gets more gradual and visible. Finally, I deactivated the pre-multiplication of the alpha over node, which allowed me to retain much of the glow details. And that's it. This was the basic mix of my stormy ocean shot. Everything that I then added over it is detailed in the course, including the mist, the spray, and some final effects on top of all that. And that's it. That is how you create animated lightning and add it into your environments and then composite it into your shots. Hope you enjoyed this process and see you next time on this channel or in one of my courses. Stay creative, my friends. Martin out.